equipping you to navigate your grief journey after child loss. This is the Hope After Child Loss podcast. On each episode, we explore the many challenges of grief as guests share their stories of loss. It's also a place where you will hear about God showing up in our darkest moments and restoring meaning, purpose, and hope to shattered lives. Hey everyone, I'm your host, Greg Buffkin, and I'm so glad you could join us. On today's episode, I'll be talking with Heather Gillis, Bowen's mom. Heather is a certified registered nurse anesthetist and the author of Waiting for Heaven, Finding Beauty in the Pain and the Struggle, that she wrote after losing her infant son, Bowen, and is a contributor for Chicken Soup for the Soul, The Joy of Less. In addition, Heather is also a trauma healing facilitator, and we'll get her to tell us a little bit more about that later on. Here's my conversation with Heather. Well, Heather, welcome to our podcast today. It's so good to have you with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. My honor to have you. Heather, why don't you take a minute or two, maybe a few minutes, and just tell us a little bit about you and tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah, so my husband and I, we had a son named Bowen. He was our third child. We have two living children. So in 2011, we gave birth to what we thought our healthy baby boy. But then when he was born, it was apparent that something was very wrong. He was whisked away to the intensive care unit right away after he was born. And then within 24 hours, we received a diagnosis that he had polycystic kidney disease, which is a disease that's incompatible with life for a baby. And so when we were given that diagnosis, we were whisked into a whole whirlwind of ICU, and he was intubated after 4 days because he wasn't able to sustain his own breathing. His kidneys were too big for his body. He was on dialysis. He was on IV drips for the 2 weeks of his life. And then after 2 weeks, the doctors told us that there wasn't anything else that they could do and that we only had the decision to take him off the ventilator. So we, as parents, did not even imagine after giving birth to him that so quickly that his life would be taken away so quickly after he was born.
Yeah. Wow. Heather, that is so much for a young mom and dad to have to deal with. And it sounds like there was no warning that this was going to be the case before he was born, right?
Right. So we were under the impression that we were going to give birth to another healthy baby boy.
Right.
And there was no indicator on the ultrasound or anything that anything was wrong.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And that's also because I was under the age of 35. So if I were to have another ultrasound being advanced maternal age, they would have caught it and we would have known. But
it was just standard protocol.
Yes. We just had the one normal ultrasound and that was it.
Oh, wow. What? And I'm guessing just from the little bit that you described that in that 2 week period where you had him with you guys, you probably didn't get to spend all that much time with him because of, you said he had to go through being hooked up to dialysis and probably all these tests that they were running.
Yeah. So I was the only one that was able to hold him.
Oh gosh.
Before he was intubated and all these tests. Otherwise, after that 4 days, he was just connected to everything. Weren't really able to hold him. We would spend time with him being in the hospital. I do have this one moment where before he was connected to everything, I remember he grabbed my finger.
Oh.
He looked right into my eyes, and it was like he knew that I was his mom.
Oh gosh. And you will always have that as a memory.
Yes.
And that will be something that you cherish for the rest of your life.
Yes, it will.
Wow, I know. I mean, I can't even imagine how hard that was for you. How did your husband do during this time?
Well, it was especially hard for him only because our son was also born on his birthday.
Oh gosh, really?
Yes. So it went from this best thing ever, my son was born on my birthday, to now I have to share the same birthday as my son who passed away.
Wow.
So,
And I can only imagine that those first couple of anniversaries of his birth date were particularly difficult. I mean, it's such
yes, they were.
a I mean, such a conundrum there for you guys celebrating your
Yes.
husband's birthday, but knowing that it would have been Bowen's birthday as well.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes, we've had the first few years were especially hard, but then we've every year after that we've tried to do something where we either because we have to learn how to celebrate.
Yeah.
We can't just every year this be just heavy over our heads and hearts,
Yeah.
and so we just have developed ways to be able to either go away on a trip because it's also 2 days before is our anniversary. So it's an anniversary and a
Wow.
birthday weekend. So we just try to do things
Wow.
to celebrate. Yes.
Well, I think there's a lot of wisdom in that because it's so
Yes.
easy to just get caught in the grief, and that
Yes.
become sometimes, unfortunately, that can become can turn into prolonged grief disorder if we stay there for
Yes.
too long.
Mhm.
But
Absolutely.
what a great way to honor Bowen by doing things that are very special so that you can make some good memories. But
Yes, absolutely.
yeah, but it really does take initiative to do that, doesn't it? Because it's hard in one respect, but on the other hand, you want to do something to honor him and to create good memories going forward.
Absolutely.
I understand that Bowen had a very short life. No matter how long we have our children, they do have an incredibly tremendous impact on our lives. And
Yes.
how would you say that, even though it was only 2 weeks, that
Mhm.
Bowen impacted your life as his mom, Heather?
Well, yes, he greatly impacted my life and our whole family's life forever. He taught us how short and precious and valuable life is, and how we're not guaranteed the next day, and just how we need to cherish every moment. And life is a gift,
Yeah, absolutely.
not to be taken for granted. And he greatly changed that for me, and it's impacted everything that we have done. I know it says in the grief books not to make any changes or do anything within the first year, and we absolutely did that. But then also too, it comes to a point where you want to be able to start clean, like a fresh slate. And so
Yeah,
we did move, after that year, and we built a house and a new home, and you can do all those things, but it's still, the grief is still there.
yeah,
um
it is.
but God did something great and amazing in our lives through our son that we probably never would have done if it wasn't for him. My husband is an oral surgeon, and he had a thriving practice at the time. And we had our family here, we had our jobs, school, everything. We had the most comfortable, great life, according to anybody, right?
Yeah,
And so but God had different plans for us, and it never would have happened if it weren't for Bowen. And so one day my husband came home from work and just said, "What would you say if we walked away from all of this and I joined the military?"
oh
And
wow.
he always had a desire to serve, and he actually was like one of the only ones in his family that never served. And so he joined the Air Force Academy, or I'm sorry, the United States Air Force. And he was really on the brink of being able to be accepted because he was older. He was 42 years old. And so if he had waited any longer, he never would have gotten in. So he was going to join the medical branch and still practice as an oral surgeon. So we went through the whole process just to see, because we knew that if God wanted us to go there, he was going to open the door.
Right.
And so once we said yes, it was like God opened all of these doors like really rapidly. Like we almost couldn't keep up.
That's so
It
cool when
was,
it happens like that, isn't it?
yes, I wish it happened like that in all areas of your life, but
Yeah, it does. It always does it.
it doesn't always work out that way.
Yeah,
So,
and when you said that you guys made a move, for our listeners, Heather and I have talked previously. You guys didn't make a move across town. You made a
no.
significant move. Tell our listeners a little bit about that.
Yes, and that's what I'm trying to say is like when something like that happens in your life to impact you to the point of you just have this bold courage that you never would have before to
Absolutely.
once you let go of to all of that like routine and comfort and everything, like our lives were uncomfortable. And so it's like once you kind of you embrace that, get comfortable at being uncomfortable, that's your norm.
Right.
And once that's your norm, then it's like all these other things they weren't hard decisions to make. So once my husband decided to join the Air Force Academy, I was like, yes, I'm all in. And doors started opening. Then the assignment, he only had two options for assignments. One was to go to Japan and one was to go to Alaska. And they accepted us to go to Alaska.
Wow. And so you guys were living in Colorado at the time, I believe, right?
So we were living in Arizona
Arizona.
at,
Okay.
at the time. And then we went to Alaska. And then once that assignment was up, because you move every 3 to 4 years, then we moved to Colorado.
Okay. I had it backwards. So from
Yeah.
Arizona to Alaska to Colorado.
Yes.
Those are some significant moves. Yeah.
Yes.
And I want to go back to
Yes.
something you said a minute ago before I forget. I think what you were conveying is something that we also discovered is that things that you feared before, things that would elicit
Yeah.
fear, you
Yes.
kind of lose that, don't you? Because once
Yes.
you've experienced your absolute worst fear, it's like
Yes.
nothing else even comes close in comparison, does it?
Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing. Mm-mm.
So it does give you, I think for us, and I think what I'm hearing you say is that it gave you a boldness to face
Yes.
life in a different way and to be able to step out and follow where God was leading, even though you didn't really know any details at that point.
Right. It was trusting in God in a way that we never had before.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was like a process as in, I know what you need. You give it to me. You trust me and you allow me to do this with you. And it was like a process that we got to do with God.
Yes.
And if you do this, then I'm going to open the doors and I have the greater plans for you.
Yeah.
You don't need to worry about it.
He loves to honor
That's
faith and trust.
yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And you have the most amazing blessings on the other side you never would have had if you just didn't trust him in that process.
I know. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to experience that to really grasp what we're saying. Heather, drawing from you guys' experience, what do you wish that more people who are looking in from the outside better understood about the impact that losing a child has on the parent?
Right. So I think that, I mean, I know many would say, well, your son was just a baby, so you didn't really have that time to develop a relationship with him. But there's a different kind of loss there. There's a loss of a life that would never be here on this side of heaven. And, there's still that loss. There's still that loss of legacy, that loss of my two children having another sibling. There's still a loss there. And, that will go with you all the days of your life, and you can do with it with what you want. You can either choose to celebrate it or to allow it to, take you to places that you probably aren't a good place to stay.
Right, right.
No. So just having him a part of our life, I mean, we just have him a part of the life in different ways. When he passed away, he was still part of our family. not in a living part of a way, but in a memory, love part of way, because there's still that love that you would have had for that child.
Certainly.
And that love never dies for that person.
No, it does not.
And that love is meant to be passed along in a legacy. So whatever you do with that love, I think matters. Whether you show it kindness to somebody, whether you do a donation, whatever it is that you decide to do with that love, it truly matters. Because if you don't, then it's like a piece of you dies as well.
That is so true. I think people who are looking in from the outside, it's hard for them to really grasp that. And truth of the matter is, we wouldn't want them to be able to, because it means
Right.
they would have had to have experienced it. And we wouldn't want anybody else to go through what we've experienced.
No, I wouldn't wish it upon anybody.
But yet, Heather, the other part of that is people see the impact at some level emotionally, because that's what they can read when they see our face, when they hear us, our voice inflections and things like that when we're talking with them. But you and I both know too that, and we talk about this a lot on our podcast, that there is also the physical and the mental impact as well. What did that look like for you and Mac?
Well, we dealt with our grief in different ways. And I know that it's very interesting. I know that a lot of couples, when they lose a child, that, Rick Warren has this saying, what you're going through can either make you bitter or better.
Absolutely.
And so this time in our lives, it definitely made us closer. And it's very interesting because both my husband and I are both twins. I have a twin and he has a twin. Yeah, so it's very interesting. So we were both going through the grief. So it's like we allowed each other to grieve in each of our own ways. I felt very validated and listened to by my husband. And I just allowed him to grieve in his own way as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes I couldn't really be around people, and sometimes that's all he wanted to be around was people.
Right. And he's a real people person.
Yes, and so am I, but I'm kind of a mix. I'm both like an introvert and an extrovert, but there's a time where in your grief, it was just, it's okay if he wants to do it that way, and it's okay if I want to do it the way I want, just as long as it's like we both can help and support and encourage each other in a healthy way.
Yeah, that's very important.
I would have to say that was a time in my life that I never had a closer relationship with God than I did after my son died.
Yeah.
That's where I heard God in ways I never have before, because it says in the Bible how God is close to the brokenhearted. And he was with me so much and so many times in so many ways that I can't even describe. And in those times, he brings you to those places where it is so painful.
Yeah.
But there's like no pain that we go through that he is not able to heal. And he knows the way to heal. So there may be times in your grief journey that you try to heal in the way that you want to. But then sometimes I just feel like that there was times where I wasn't ready to face things. Like, for example, my job, I'm a nurse anesthetist, so I give anesthesia for a living. I was working at a trauma center at the time. I saw a lot of trauma and I saw babies being born. And at the time, it was really, really hard for me to be around that.
Oh, I can only imagine.
Because I felt like there was trauma in my life. Like, how could I add more trauma to my life by being around all that other stuff? And how could I be around babies being born and all this? So I just felt like there was times that was like God was like nudging me, like putting me into these places. And I kept saying, God, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. I'm not ready. Yeah. And it's going to feel like that sometimes.
Yeah.
But I can promise you that when you trust him in that process and you allow God to nudge you where he's trying to go, because eventually what will happen, you're going to be backed into a corner and there's going to be no way out to look out or look up,
Been there and done that.
Yeah. So it's kind of like we have a choice. Either we can keep trying to do it the same way that we want and keep on causing us more pain upon ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or we can just reach out to the one that we can just take his hand and just trust him to be able to lead us.
Yeah, because he knows us better than we do. And
he does.
I think about something that Levi Lusko talked about, and that is running towards the fear. And
Yeah.
in our cases, it's about running towards the grief and the pain, because we can try to outrun it, or we
Right.
can try to bury it, try to ignore it. We can bury ourselves in work, however we choose to do it. But eventually we've got to face it. And I think the longer we delay that, or try to
Yes.
skirt around it, I think the impact is even greater. So, yes, if you're listening today and you're in that early season of grief, we understand that none of this feels good when you think about it. You know, it might be very frightening to think about going back to work or taking some steps that you just doing things that you haven't done since your loss. But as you take that step forward, and it will have to be a conscious decision to do it, once you've done it that one time, you'll discover that the next time you have to do it, it won't be quite as hard. And the next time,
Exactly.
so, I hope that makes sense. It certainly doesn't feel good to think about facing it, but it really does work better that way. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. And I actually have a funny story about that
Yeah, tell
because,
us.
like what you're saying, you can't outrun grief. Like, I literally tried to outrun grief.
How far'd you get?
Lots of marathons,
Literal marathons.
little marathon,
So
literally
you're
marathon. So
you're a runner.
I was a runner.
Yeah.
And so I was not a runner until after our son died. But it was a way for me to just be quiet with God and just process my grief. But it's strange because the way that it works is like it's almost like when that physical pain matched my inside pain, it was like this sweet spot. And I literally I kept running race after race or race, but then after every finish line, there was still that grief.
Yeah.
But the thing is, though, I'm not saying that God didn't use that, because great things came from it. Because when I decided to run, I don't know why I decided to run for marathons, but then when I did, I qualified for the Boston Marathon. I
Oh,
mean, I
wow.
wasn't any kind of talented runner or anything. I just had a lot of pain and grief. And
Yeah, but
so
there's got to be a little bit of talent there to qualify for the Boston Marathon. Come on.
I just had a lot of, I mean, like, I literally felt like Forrest Gump. I just could keep running and running and running. And it was like, I've run 20 miles already. Like, it
Yeah.
just felt like
Well,
a place for my,
yeah, it makes sense. I mean, when you
yes,
consider what you were dealing with and why you were
yes.
doing it and what you were experiencing when you were doing it.
Yeah. And it just felt like really good for a place for my grief to go.
Yeah.
And so, but then at the time, I didn't even know what God, but then again, God had another plan with it. So I qualified for the Boston Marathon. And the year that I went to the Boston Marathon was in 2013 when the Boston bombing happened.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Wow.
So that was the crazy part, is here I'm doing this as a way to heal. And then here the bombs happen. And then there was more tragedy, more trauma. And it just kind of opened my eyes to so much. How we can just be on these paths and these roads to healing, but then the enemy is always going to be there to attach more pain to that wound. And how he's just going to come. And then, so it's like, here you're trying to do something good, and he's trying to keep you away from that good thing that God has for you. And he's trying to cause more fear and anxiety and worry and doubt and putting on that wound so you can stay away from God's plans of what he has for you.
Yeah. Because we tend to gravitate to what's the most comfortable
Yes.
when you're experiencing that level of grief and loss.
Yes.
You want
Yes.
everything to be comfortable and cozy and
Yes.
peaceful. You don't want anything difficult.
Exactly. But the thing is that what I was doing, a lot of the races and running I would do it for a fundraiser, to raise money for Bowen. So it felt good. It was like, this twofold thing
Yeah.
where I could, spend time with God, do it for a good cause. And but then the bombings happened, and the enemy was trying to again keep me away from what God had for me.
Yeah. And he's particularly good at that, isn't he?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what did you learn about God in your grief, Heather, that you didn't know about him before?
Well, I can tell you this, that before my son Bowen was born, I mean, I would have to say at best, I was a checkbox Christian.
I understand what you mean by that, but
I
our
was,
listeners might not know. So why don't you expand on that a bit?
well, in the Bible, I mean, it talks about the Pharisees. I mean, it just talks about like everything that I was doing. I was doing it for God, but I wasn't doing it with God.
Big difference.
Me- Meaning that if I read my Bible, check, I prayed, check, I went to church, check, I did this check. It was more just a checkbox. It was more just a routine. It was more. So when my son was born, that all was blown away. That was taken away
Yeah.
because I could not put my trust and my hope and my faith in my routine, in my comfort, in the four walls that I built of my false security of what I thought was my identity and what I thought that was good. It was literally just making that playing field of like really showing me what are the cracks in my foundation. What is God? What is my firm foundation really? Is it my comfort? Is it my routine? Is it all of these things that I was putting my hope and trust in and building my false security in?
Yeah.
Because none of those things are going to give me the eternal hope, joy, peace, love, anything that more than what God can.
Yeah.
It wasn't what I could do and for myself. Because what's the point in sending Jesus if it's all up to me?
Yeah.
Doing
Exactly.
all of those
There would have
things.
been no point.
No point.
Yeah. And when you go through something like that, it just kind of, like you said, it blows everything up about everything that we knew. And sometimes
Exactly.
it just leaves people feeling absolutely crushed and totally overwhelmed. So I can't imagine going into something that traumatic and not having that relationship with Jesus. I wouldn't want to
Me.
know.
I don't either.
And I'm thankful that you didn't have to know.
Yeah.
So how, I guess maybe you've answered this in some ways already, but how did your faith actually help you to be able to better process and navigate, I think particularly that first year or two, because those are the hardest without question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it definitely made me cling to the scripture like I never had before. I mean, when I read the Bible, it was like his words were jumping off the page and becoming part of me. Like they were living and breathing part of me,
Yeah.
like in my bones and my my veins. I mean, I don't know how else to. His living word is just that. It's the living word that's meant to live in us.
Yes.
And so I never had that before. And so I didn't know this at the time, and I never really truly had a relationship with the Holy Spirit. And I did not really truly understand what that was until I went through what I went through with my son. And I couldn't even, like, looking back, I can put it into words, but going through it at the time, I didn't know what that was.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was, I was growing in my relationship with the Holy Spirit, listening to God's voice in a way I never had before.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that in itself can be life-changing as a believer.
Yes. Yes.
And I think most of us grow up as Christians, at least in the past. I think it's changing some, but like you, I didn't really grow up hearing much about the role of the Holy Spirit. I mean,
Mm-mm.
not until much later in life did
Mhm.
I really start learning about him.
I know.
Yeah, and it's
Same.
so unfortunate. I want us to talk a little bit about something that a lot of us go through after we lose a child, and that's how other people respond.
Yes.
Sometimes, and yeah, that's typically the response that I get. So it can be both good and just bad. People want to help. They're concerned about us. If they know us and they love us, they're concerned. They want to do something to help because they can see the impact
Yes.
that it's having. And some people just do it incredibly well,
Yes.
without ever having been instructed, because we don't come with an instruction book on how to do that. we do see a great example in the book of Job, how,
Yes.
after Job loses literally everything, his three friends show up, and for the first 7 days, they just sit there with him and they keep their mouths shut. And it was good. But then they opened their mouths and they just showed up at that point and started throwing up. And I mean, throwing up words that were so
Yes.
inappropriate and criticizing and judging him. And it just goes on and on and on for many chapters. How did that look for you guys, Heather? I mean, did you have both people
Yes.
that really did make a difference because they cared? What did that look like?
Yeah, well, the people that showed up for us, I mean, of course, were like most of our family. But then the other people that would show up is either someone that has also lost a child, but the people that had been through cancer was very interesting because
Really?
those were, yes, those were the people, like you said, were comfortable at being uncomfortable because really what it is it makes them uncomfortable to approach you and to actually broach and talk about the subject about a child dying because that's
Yeah.
a really hard thing to talk about. And really, in the end, people just aren't equipped
No, we're not. We
to
don't
know
come
what to say
equipped.
or do. No. And so I had to not only go through my grief, but then also put down my, I guess, expectations of other people of what I expected them to do. It was just this really weird, eye opening process.
Yeah.
And I had to give them grace because there were some people that would just say things like, well, at least you have two other living children at home. You should be thankful
Oh,
and
gosh.
things like that. Or, why are you still having grief and things like that? Like things that, like, Brene Brown has this one quote that, like, you cannot be saying these comments. Like, if you're not going to be in the same arena, or if you're not going to be sitting in the front seat, if you're going to be sitting in the back row,
Hmm. Yeah.
you don't get to have an opinion or say if you're not going to be engaging or sitting in the front row or the same arena,
Yeah.
so it's just kind of one of those things. It's like you can sit there and look from the outside in all you want and make all your comments and judgments, but in the end, it's really the people that come alongside you that I valued most, because those are the people that were willing to sit with you in your grief, allowed me to cry. Like I remember a woman, she allowed me, it really caused me a lots of anxiety and pain to hold a baby.
I'll bet.
And so I'll never forget, she was the first person to allow me to do that. And I was like, I'm just going to cry.
Oh,
And she's like, it's okay. And so just like having those people with you that allow you to process that grief and
yeah.
to allow you just to weep and just be okay with it.
Yeah.
Those are the people I cherish the most.
Yep. We had we had some people like that in our lives too, and it cements those relationships in a way that nothing else can. And you just
Yes.
you think about those people in a totally different way than you were able to before, because what they did was just so invaluable in the
Yes.
healing process.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and so I think you would agree that, like so many of my guests have said, if you don't know what to say, it's okay not to say anything. It's okay just to show up as you were describing and just give the gift of your presence. And that's good. I mean, don't think of that as being just something that you have to default to because anything else you do, you feel like you just don't know how to do it. That's a gift, just to show up and be
Really
present.
is. And just what you're saying too, Greg, is that you're telling people and giving them permission of how to treat you.
Yeah,
So that was one of the best things I ever did because I had to go back to work and I did not want to go back to work. And this touches on what you had talked about earlier about taking those baby steps. Sometimes they're just baby steps, but eventually
yeah,
you're going to have to get back out there. And I did not want to go to work. And if it was not for my husband, I don't know if I would have.
yeah. I get
And,
that.
but going back to work also caused a lot of pain and anxiety because everybody knew I was pregnant. So
Yeah,
when you go back to work and you're on maternity leave, I had no baby to talk about. Like, so everyone pretty much knew that I had my son passed away, but then it's like, what do you say when you go back? You don't want people to ignore you. You want
right.
people to actually acknowledge you and act like you're a human. And so one of the best things I ever did was write a letter to the people that I work with and just telling them how to treat me.
Oh,
Like,
gosh, what a great idea.
it was the best thing I ever did. And everyone, it also broke the ice and opened up the door. After I did that, people came up to me and said, "Thank you so much for reading that letter. Now I know how to approach you and talk to you and speak to you." And I was like, "Thank you." I'm like, all I want to do is feel like I'm normal, because in my other life, when I was going out to the grocery store or whatever I did, people would see me and then turn around and walk the other way.
That hurts so much, doesn't it?
Yes. And so I did not want that. I did not
Yeah.
want that. Did not want to walk into the room and people just ignore me and bypass me like they don't know me. I mean, you don't have to acknowledge my grief, but just acknowledge me as a person.
Right. Yep. We crave anything that would make us feel somewhat normal, because for us
Yes.
there isn't any normal anymore. I mean,
Right.
everything got turned upside down when we lost our child. And that reminds me of something else, and I'm pretty sure I know what you're going to say to this. Other people that are trying to figure out how to relate to us, I think sometimes they're afraid if they use our child's name that it's going to be,
Yes.
like a sword through our heart. I don't know about you, but for me, for my wife and I, it was the opposite. We love to hear our child's name because
Yes.
it reminds us that other people loved our son and cared about him and care enough about us to know that we want to talk about our child, just like I know you want to talk about Bowen.
Yes. Absolutely. The same for me.
Yeah. It's the opposite of what you think, but take the
Yeah.
risk, because
Yeah.
you'll probably see a smile come across our face when you do.
Yes. Yeah. And just ask the person permission. Is it okay if I use your child's name?
Yeah, if you don't know and you're not sure. Well, Heather, I do want to spend just a little bit of time talking about the book that you wrote. And just as a reminder to the listeners, the name of her book is Waiting for Heaven, Finding Beauty in the Pain and the Struggle. And you wrote this book, I think, a couple of years after you guys lost Bowen, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So what was the motivation behind this, Heather?
Well, I had always been a journaler, and writing was just a way for me to process. And I was just writing so much. God was just showing me so much that it was hard not to write it all down and process it. So this book, it's a journey of our son's life when he was alive, but then it's also the things that I journaled when he was alive and the process of after he passed away.
Right.
And just it's just something that I did with God.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's just another thing. So that's when another thing, God teaching me how to do it with him.
Right. And
So
what do you hope that readers will get out of the book when they read your story there?
to not be afraid of their pain and their struggle of what they're going through, that God can turn it into something so much more beautiful than we could ask for
Mm,
or imagine. And that sometimes when we're waiting for the heaven, like, when and then kind of thing. It's not about waiting for heaven to come to us. It's about allowing God to take us through the process that we can have places of heaven on earth right here.
that is so true. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, I think sometimes unfortunately, we think about eternity as something in the future, but in Jesus,
Yeah.
we're living eternal life right now, right here on earth.
Yeah, we're getting ready for heaven.
Absolutely. We're kind of in that training session right now.
Yes.
Yeah. And the cool
Yes.
thing is, when you get there, what an incredible reunion you're going to have with Bowen.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yes.
Heather, it has been such an honor to have you on our podcast and to have you share your story about Bowen and what God's done in your life. We just appreciate so much your transparency and your willingness to just, put your emotions on the line. I think it's going to make a big difference in the lives of moms and dads who may be listening.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's been really such an honor and blessing to be able to share about our story.
Oh, it's absolutely my privilege and my honor, Heather. Thank you so much. Well, thank you for joining us today. If you would like to offer your thoughts on today's episode, simply click the link under the episode summary. And if you're interested in sharing your story on a future episode, email us using the provided link. Join us again in 2 weeks to hear another story of how God meets us in our pain, creates something beautiful from the broken pieces, and restores meaning, purpose, and hope.